So this was my way to escape into a fantasy world and have my own little private secret world where I could go. And the problem was that that became a big part of my life. So in the evenings, at night, when I got home from school, it wasn't unusual to find me to masturbate 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes more. And when I was 12 or 13 years old, I was in my father's bedroom. My parents slept apart, separate rooms. And one day I was just being a kid, searching around the room, and I found some pornographic magazines under his bed. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what is this? I had never really seen, outside of my mother, a woman's body that was exposed, and it was like somebody just lit a bomb and threw it in my life. I was totally absorbed by it, totally sensationalized, I guess you would call it, and it just mushroomed my sexual addiction, my problems with masturbation even more. Because now I had visages, things to look at, images that I would become a part of my behavior to get high, if you will, on these feelings of sexuality. And Dad had a number of those different magazines, and so it became a ritual. Every day, every week, certainly, as often as I could, when I could sneak them out and get together, alone by myself, and that would be what I would do. Shortly after discovering the pornography, I had my first real love experience, if you will. At least that's what I considered it to be at the time. And being at that point pretty well started into my sexual addiction, I either consciously or subconsciously found a young lady that would be sexual with me. So I had my first experience with sexual intercourse when I was 14 years old. And that, again, acted just like the pornography did when I found it under my father's bedroom, or found it in my father's bedroom. It just emblazoned me all that much more. I enjoyed the experience. But the key was not that it was an act of love for me. It was an act of escape. It was a way of latching on to something that felt really good that I could pursue to make up the difference in my life for the pain and the suffering and the woundedness that was inside of me. And so that started, at that point, it really started a pursuit of women from that day forward. And unfortunately, that included objectifying women, seeing them as sex objects rather than as people. But in my addiction, I didn't realize that. I couldn't see that. I didn't know. All I knew was that, quote unquote, I was on the hunt and looking for more and more girls to be sexual with. So there was definitely a progression, from that early age 4 up to age 11 and then into high school. I obviously did not come from what you would call a peaceful, warm, loving home. There was a lot of strife and issues between my parents. And I determined early on, having sat through that all those years, that I was going to have a better marriage than they had. Didn't think about how I was going to do that, since I never had an example of what a good marriage was, certainly not on a day-to-day basis that I could look at. But met my wife. It was at a church rally, and we dated for a couple of years and got married. And although I still had these very strong urges that were going on within me, I thought that marriage would be a cure or healing for me. I never spoke about these urges that I had. Of course, I didn't know that I was a sex addict either. I was completely in denial and had no clue that that's what my real situation was. I just knew that I had a very what I considered to be a very strong sex drive. And over time, I found myself getting back into pornography. My wife was aware of the fact that this was happening. She knew about my collection that I had, and she was willing to tolerate that. And then after a few more years came the fact that pornography was not enough. I needed more stimulus to pull these brain chemicals down to keep my addiction going. And so I strayed out of the marriage and started out with prostitution, actually, and didn't know at the time, where to meet prostitutes and things like that, but discovered that and started having an entire secret life built around sexual pursuit that my wife had no idea, was going on. And it was a demeaning and terrible time, but I was also falling into this trap, of just completely pursuing what I thought was making me happy, or trying to put something in my life that gave me some meaning. That's how empty I was and how bereft. Well, I also started having affairs, and I had multiple affairs, typically with women that I met at work or ended up being clients or things along that line. And as you can imagine, with all that much activity going on secretly, emotionally I was not there in the marriage. And so we started drifting apart steadily until it came to the point where it was at a breaking point. And my wife and I started going to a marriage counselor, and it was there that I started to get some hints and some clues that something was wrong with me. And what I'd witnessed at home and seen from my father and all of those types of things, I thought I was just fine, and that she had the problem. It wasn't me. But I began to realize as we went to the marriage counselor that maybe John had some issues that he needed to look at, but I still didn't know what they were. And it all pretty much exploded one day when my wife and I decided to have an honesty session. And it was a big step for me, but I had gone through enough counseling at this point where I decided, if I'm going to save my marriage, it's time that I really get honest, because I hadn't been honest. I'd lied to her to cover my sexual acting out, and so that took place. And of course, she was very wounded and very hurt by everything that she heard, and it was a very, very difficult time. We went through a period of about 6 to 9 months, discovering whether or not we were going to stay together.